Hello, 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 you guys. Welcome to the stream. I am your host, Casty Streeter, and welcome to CastCast, where we are going to preview and analyze, and I am going to analyze the Week 9 matchups of this week's games. We do have some good matchups, last week being kind of an oddball week, if I'm being honest. And, you know, overall, I think, this week of games pretty interesting and pretty fun, and definitely seems to be a lot more games that are gonna, you know, affect the playoffs later in the season. But moving on, we are gonna go and look at these games, and of course, the first game that we are going to look at is the Dolphins and the Kansas City Chiefs in Frankfurt, Germany. Now, these are obviously two teams that are both 6-2. It's an early game. The Chiefs are given a slight advantage them despite them having a less than good week last week. Mahomes being, I guess, sick, and then having, him just being affected throwing two picks against a Denver defense that ultimately has started to clamp down, showing why they were one of the better defenses last year and have struggled immensely this season. I am not going to lie, I haven't really done too much thinking about these games, but I do think that because neither team is very, very hurt, to be honest with you, I think that this is going to be a big game. We're going to go in, we're going to look at the injury report really quick. I don't think that these two players really affect too much for the Dolphins. Teron Armstead being hurt is never good, especially with an knee injury. I think that they're going to need to protect Tua in this game. Xavier Howard potentially playing with a groin injury, not good either. He did not play last week when the Dolphins played New England, but they didn't really need him because New England, to be honest, is just not that great of a team. Um, and then you're looking at Braxton Berrios hurt. I don't really care because they have Waddle and Hill. You know that Hill is probably going to try and exploit this Kansas City team, even though I think that they know him very well. So I think it is going to be a very tough game for him, But other than that, looking out who's out for the Chiefs, you don't have Clyde Edwards Hilaire. I don't think it really matters, to be honest with you. Richie James, questionable, and then Willie Gay, linebacker, questionable. I don't think that these injuries are really going to hinder the Chiefs very much. I think the biggest injury that we look at in this entire game is Teron Armstead, to be honest with you. I think Xavier Howard's a blow, but since they have Jalen Ramsey back, they have another number one corner, essentially. And, this may go in the Dolphins' favor in terms of the Kansas City having the most drop passes in the NFL. I think it's like 20 drop passes or something crazy at this point, which is just really, really deflating. I do think, Mahomes is playing fine. Yeah, he had two picks last week. He wasn't himself, but I've decided to take a look at the depth chart here to see if they've really changed anything. They have put Kadarius Toney as a backup wide receiver here, so they have Sky Moore, Marcus Valdez-Scantling, and Rashee Rice. And I think Rashee Rice has kind of proven that he deserves to have a starting job. I think Marcus Valdez-Scantling, even though he hasn't done too much this season, gives them a dynamic that they solely need because Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, and Rashee Rice aren't all the biggest of guys. Rashee Rice, don't get me wrong, being pretty physical, I guess, and pretty bursty. But then you also have Travis Kelce, who is obviously their workhorse receiving threat. So I think that it's going to be very hard for Miami to put pressure on Mahomes, and I think he's going to get a good amount of. I think that he's going to get a good amount of time in the pocket, and whenever you give any sort of quarterback like Mahomes time, he can ultimately carve you up. And it's like, to me, you've got a smart guy like Kelsey, and it's gonna feel probably more like a home crowd as well, because I know that since Taylor Swift, I think they said that she's gonna be at the game. She has been attracting a lot more fans to the Chiefs, not like they didn't already have a lot of fans regardless because of their, recent Super Bowl winning history and contention. But going over to Germany, and Taylor Swift has a very global presence. I'm sure that there are some Swifties that are going to be going to the game. So I think this is going to feel more like a home game for the Chiefs, of course, than the Dolphins. I mean, if you think of Florida teams and you think of over in Europe, you always think of the Jaguars. But getting a little off topic here, I think, looking at, the Dolphins and looking at, the Chiefs and who the Chiefs have played, you know, the Chiefs have, played some games lately that are, I think, closer than they should have been, like the Jets, Minnesota, even though Minnesota was, I guess playing really, really well. I think that, they could have easily beat them. Even when they beat Denver and held Russell Wilson to less than 100 yards, like this is a lot closer than I would have imagined, but obviously Denver has been kind of, doing really well. They did beat the Chargers, who, it was a shootout through 14, the first like two touchdowns each, and then the Chiefs just ultimately ran away with it. But you look at the Dolphins, and I guess one thing that I saw this week is that when they're going up against winning teams, they have really struggled this year. I can't remember what the statistic was, but essentially, I guess the Dolphins, even though many consider them a top 10 team, which I don't disagree with just because they have such a potent offense, they've done really poorly against winning teams. You look at Buffalo and then you look at Philadelphia. And I guess, what, let's look at, who was, those were their only two losses type of thing. But, looking at these other games, like Los Angeles, close game shootout, where two ultimately had to put up over 450 yards. You know, New England, even the first time they barely beat them. Yes, they creamed Denver. We all know about that, but Denver was really suffering at this point. Then their first loss coming the week after to Buffalo, where they absolutely got smothered. Because I think that teams know how to play. I think that there's a formula for playing the Dolphins and for keeping them to a low amount of, maybe not a low amount of points, but a more average, where their offense just doesn't show what it's capable of. And even, I mean, this game against New England in week 2, it's like, they held them to 24, which, is, acceptable to me against the Dolphins. 3 touchdowns and a field goal. And then it's like even, Buffalo held them down to 20. And, just a lot of these games. And then there's Philadelphia also, who held them, down to 17. And it's like they got a little bit more against, New England. Same score from New England, but ultimately, I think that the Dolphins are going to come down to whether their defense can perform better. And I do think that this is still a tough matchup for I do think that this is a tough matchup for the Chiefs, but I think that, honestly, with the way that they play and the way that they spread the ball around, I think that they have the edge due to the fact that they have, a really good tight end in Kelsey, and I don't think that the Dolphins really match up well against Kelsey. They don't really have a safety you can put on them. They don't really have They don't really have a linebacker that can cover him. Obviously, he's, arguably the best tight end in football, but I think that they have the edge with that. And I do think the Chiefs overall just have a better defense, than most would give them credit for, which is fully healthy. I really like McDuffie and Snead. I think they're two, very smart, crafty corners that play the ball really well. And with that, I think that you also, have Chris Jones, Karlaftis, and, even Justin Reed, who is a high flying safety that is hard to throw deep against. Very, very hard to throw deep against, because of his speed. So I really think that, the Chiefs can win this game. I'm not going to give them a huge advantage, however, and I'm going to say that I think that they win this game. I think they win this game by 4 points, and I say that because I think that they could have, easily a game-winning touchdown or something like that to win the game, where they need more than a field goal or something like that. But it could easily be like a 3 or a 1-point game, as well. I think that, it's safe to say. I think that, they really gotta these mental errors by the Chiefs wide receivers. If they get rid of those, this is still the team to beat in the AFC. Whereas right now, I think that the team to beat is kind of ambiguous in the sense that like each team that is has a winning record and a team that is going to be going to the playoffs up to this point has their own flaws in the AFC. But yeah, that's my prediction is Chiefs by 4 in Germany. Moving on, we have the Seahawks and the Ravens. This a very, very, important game in my opinion. The Seahawks, who have recently came and are number one in their division, I never would have thought that the San Fran would have lost 3 in a row essentially and ultimately given up their spot to Seattle. And I mean, you look at this division, the Rams, you know, the Rams, with a probable win this week since they're going up against my Packers who haven't been playing well and haven't seemed to turn it on offense. But, it could still kind of linger in and, be lingering around with how close this division is now. Early on, it looked like San Fran, oh, this unbeatable team. And then, just a few injuries have kind of set them back. And then Purdy just going cold at the wrong time, in the middle of the season. But Seattle, going up against the Ravens, this is a really true test. As you can see here, they really don't give Seattle that big of a shot of winning this, I guess, in the ESPN analytics. To me, I think that the Ravens are one of the more complete teams. They're in arguably the toughest division this year in football where every team is above 500, which is, kind of mind-boggling. You had Pittsburgh who went to 5-3 and easily could have been 4-4, Thursday night and winning drive by Kenny Pickett. But yeah, the Baltimore to me is actually one of the teams that has been kind of sweeping under the radar. They obviously looking at this, they have over 200 points scored at this point, midway through the season, which is pretty good. And then the points against is really, really good. And I know that this was a defense that struggled a lot last year, and they seemingly couldn't get that much pressure. And I mean, not that the offense could have helped them very much with all the injuries, but this year I think that the Ravens are looking as good a team as any going into week 9. So going down to the breakdown of the Seahawks playing the Ravens, it is obviously in Baltimore at M&T Bank Stadium. And Lamar Jackson's having a great year. not that as many TDs as I would want throwing, but he's obviously got a good amount rushing as well, and a really high completion percentage. Where it's like this is a team that both runs the ball and passes really well, but then you also do have the Seahawks looking here where Kenneth Walker is having an incredible year, averaging almost 5 yards a carry, which is, pretty asinine. And, Geno Smith is still doing, kind of what he was doing last year. But this game and thinking about it and looking at the injuries, none really that are that relevant for the Seahawks. And then the only one that I really think about with the Ravens that would be kind of bad would be Marcus Williams potentially. You want this safety who's going to be able to be over the top to defend against Lockett and DK, who are both great deep threats. Rocky Sin being injured, kind of unfortunate there, even though I don't think that he is a starting corner on this team, to be honest with you. If I look at it right quick, they obviously have they have Stevens and then Marlon Humphrey, of course, and he's their kind of slot guy. But overall, I think that this team has become very, very well balanced, and Roquan Smith is also playing a really, really good football. As to me, he's on par with Fred Warner, to be honest, as the best in the game potentially, and just a very solid mixture of veterans and pass rushers. Jadeveon Clowney, journeyman pass rusher who's still kind of getting it done. Manda Beek, who's a young pass rusher. Michael Pierce, your nose tackle. But overall, this team, very, very, very stout, and they have good depth as well. I just think that a lot of these guys that I see, even as backups, it's like we're starters at one point. So they've got very good depth, very good, especially on defense. I feel like on offense, yeah, it's really good that you have Zay Flowers, who is, kind of emerged as your guy. I think Odell Beckham is kind of rediscovering himself because obviously it's hard to miss an entire year and come back and be the exact same player. But, Mark Andrews, I think, is as good a tight end as any. And, this team is just very well oiled, and they have a pretty good own line as well with, their left tackle Ronnie Stanley being an easy top 5 in that, Linderbaum a top center. And I mean, even Morgan Moses, really not that bad, but he is doubtful for this game. Um, I think that looking at this, I am going to give the game to the Ravens because it is at their home. They have every reason to be confident going into this week. Obviously, Seattle, they won last week against Cleveland, which I thought was going to be a loss for them. I think that this is just going to be a very, very tough week for them. And I think that their offense hasn't really gotten going to the extent that I thought it would with three guys, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who was, one of the top prospect wide receivers from this last draft, seemingly not doing too much. And then you have Metcalf and Lockett, so you have a very well oiled, wide receiver room, as well as obviously Kenneth Walker doing amazing work for them on the ground. But ultimately, I think that because the strength of the Seattle Seahawks defense is their secondary, Jamal Adams, Witherspoon, Rick Woolen, I think that this is kind of, it's a really good defense against the throw. Witherspoon has kind of exceeded expectations, I think, and benefited from a really good system. I think that the Seahawks have always been able to have, really good defenses, but I think it's going to come down to the fact that you're going up against a team that doesn't throw it a ton. Obviously, Zay Flowers is having a good year with 461 yards so far, but only one TD. And if under 10 TDs throwing says one thing about this team is that they don't throw it too much. And Lamar Jackson is also doing a good job protecting the ball. He's had some, one of the games that they lost was because he threw a game-ending interception, but overall just really returning to form, really proving that he's worth the money that the Ravens signed him to. So I am going to go with the Ravens in this game, and I'm going to go with them by 7 because I think that they are just, too lethal. And even, I mean, looking at their last few wins, Tennessee obviously kind of not that impressive to me, but then Detroit was a very impressive win. Like I don't think we've seen anything like this where it's a top 5 team in each conference and they get blown out like this. Maybe the last game that I think that I remember that reminds me of this in a way was when the Bills beat the Dolphins. But Detroit, they're saying that Detroit could be the number 1 team in the NFC, and I mean that's saying something. Obviously, the Ravens also kind of just eased up on Arizona. I don't think that the score is really accurate, to be honest with you. But yeah, coming off of a win last week, that was pretty easy. I think that the Ravens win this one, and the Seahawks they run out of luck in this game because I think that I wouldn't say it was lucky that they did well against the Browns, but the Browns had an off game last week, where Myles Garrett didn't really get to Geno Smith, which is what I thought was going to happen. But yeah, Ravens over the Seahawks by 7. Moving on, we have Cardinals and Browns. The Browns, obviously, like I said, have are in like the toughest division record wise at the very least. And, looking at Arizona, they obviously just traded Joshua Dobbs to the Vikings at the trade deadline. And their leading wide receivers are obviously Hollywood Brown. I actually don't really care if Deshaun Watson plays this game. I think that this game should be winnable. Unless, of course, Tune comes in and plays absolutely, balls out or something like that. But I just don't see it. I don't even recognize this guy at all. I've known nothing about this guy, to be honest with you. But the thing I'll say about the Browns is it does kind of suck. You have Greg Newsome out, David Bell being out, who cares? DeJuan Jones, one of your starting tackles, out or questionable, I mean. And this, but then you look at the Cardinals and obviously having lost, everyone but one of their games, arguably the worst team in football, probably the worst team in football. I think that the Browns win this at home and they improve to 5-3 because they can be itching on Baltimore's neck, With Baltimore, they have a good shot to win, I think, but they could very well lose against the Seahawks, on any given Sunday because the Seahawks aren't a pushover team. But yeah, I'm going to go Cleveland Browns and I'm going to go them by 14. I think the offense, has been kind of conservative, which makes sense, without Watson. But that's the way they need to play without Watson or Chubb, obviously, because of his ending injury. And I don't think it'll be a very hard game for Cleveland to get after and put pressure on Tune. Next, we have a NFC AFC matchup with the Buccaneers visiting the Houston Texans. The Texans suffering kind of a humiliating loss. where essentially they just didn't have that much offense last week. And you don't need to lose games like that where it's like, the Panthers, the other team other than the Cardinals, who are arguably the worst, I think have more talent and just have had a hard time discovering themselves this year. But still, regardless, it's kind of nuts. I think that Tampa Bay really isn't the defense that they once were either. And I think CJ Stroud is going to, come out and he's going to be gunslinging and he's going to recover from last week. And I don't know what to say about Tampa Bay, but they just seem to be very, very, very inconsistent. You know, looking at this, it's like you do have Evans who does have 500 yards at this point, 7 games in. But, to have a guy like Nico Collins, who was an unknown, come in and then have the chemistry with Stroud and have more yards is just kind of a sign of like, the down year that I wouldn't even say down year, but it's like if you look at this stat line, if replicate it through the second half of the season or on the last 10, obviously, we're 7 games in. For the Buccaneers anyway, they've already had a bye. They have 10 more games. You're probably looking at around, 1,300 yards or something like that, in my opinion. But, there's some things on the Tampa Bay that also doesn't reassure me that they're going to do well. They have Logan Hall, who is out there, young defensive end pass rusher. Vita Vea, who obviously one of the most stout run defenders in the league. I think he has a knee injury. Oh, wait a minute. Ron Page here. Let's scroll down to this. No, here, let me find this quick. But yeah, Vita Vea has a groin injury, which is just never good to me. And then you look at, who is out for the Texans. It does kind of suck that Brevin Jordan, Damian Pierce, who was doing pretty well, and Robert Woods, their veteran wide receiver, are all out. And then Sheldon Rankins is questionable, their D tackle. But I just don't think the thing with the Buccaneers that I think is making it harder and harder for them to play well is that they don't have a run game. And with no run game, everyone knows you're going to pass and it's going to make it harder and harder. And obviously going from Brady to Baker, Baker's not having a terrible year. Looking at this, it's like he's definitely kind of shown that he can be the guy. I really just think though that like obviously looking at this, they don't even have a guy with 100 carries through 8 games. That is not a good sign, And obviously, the Texans have kind of just thrown due to the fact of the emergence of CJ Stroud. I don't think that their run game is bad, but obviously Damon Pierce being out is kind of unfortunate. Let me go look here quickly at their depth chart here real quick and see who they have. So they have so the Texans have Devin Singletary, and he's by no means a guy that is going to run for a lot of yards, being a pound back. And I don't know either of these other two guys, Mike Boone and Dare Ogunbo. I'm gonna butcher this. Ogunbowale. I don't know who they are. I I don't know either of these guys. I think that Boone is a younger player, if I remember correctly. But you're banged up on in a position that you haven't been leaning on all year. So I don't think it's going to affect too much. And the thing is that if Houston were to lose this game, you're ultimately, you know, you have a probability of dropping, where you do have the same record as, Tennessee and who lost on Thursday. And your division is kind of one of those where it's like you may only have the division leader make it, which is Jacksonville, who is 6-2 right now and looking very good. So, yeah, thinking that it's in Houston, Tampa Bay just hasn't really done wonders for me. I think that this game can be won by Houston. I think that they win by 7. Looking at the next game, we have an NFC matchup with Bears Saints. I don't think much has to be talked about with this game. The Bears they're still having problems where, you know, they're still having problems where you have Fields who has, his thumb injury. And I mean, that's one of those things that if you rush him back, it's like you saw Aaron Rodgers last year play with a bad thumb all year, and he just did not look the same, missed throws that he never would have missed, and just a lot of different, and it's like whenever it's your throwing thumb, which is, pivotal to your ability to throw. And I mean, it may feel fine, but if you make a throw and it starts to feel irritated and you ultimately your throw's affected by it and you can't make precise passes, it is not going to be good. So I assume that, he's probably not going to play, which also means that it's going to be Tyson Badgett again. And not that Tyson Badgett looked terrible, but it's like he is still a backup. And ultimately, they tried to lean on the run more. And I think against the New Orleans defense, who is, built and really stacked up front, I don't think the Bears have a shot in hell this game. Unless Badgett has some anomaly of a game where, he's able to throw it to DJ Moore and all these guys. I just don't see it happening. We haven't even talked about the We haven't even talked about the injuries. We have Jaquan Brisker, their young safety, out. Tremaine Edmonds out, who's their, most downfield and fastest linebacker and most out against the run. And then obviously Fields doubtful. I doubt he goes, to be honest with you. And then looking at the Saints, oh yeah, their only player out is Ty Summers. And the Saints, last week, they were finally able to, go out and ball out on offense. This is what I was kind of waiting for from them, because if you look at, the scores, yeah, they stomped New England, but New England's been terrible this year. And there's just been a lot of times when I feel like they should have been able to score, especially since the return of Kamara. And Kamara is doing good now, now that he's back on the team. But, Olave's been having a great year, and they just have a very well-oiled machine in New Orleans where it's like Michael Thomas is still, not hurt, and he has been playing pretty good. And then you have, Rashid Shaheed, who is just the speed demon that has come onto the scene this year. And I think that you've got, you know, a team that's very well oiled. I think that they have a good O line. I think that Derek Carr finally proved it last week. We'll see what we get this week, to be honest with you. But it's like you also have Jamal Williams healthy again, Alvin Kamara, obviously, but Jamal Williams is a great short down back, and this team can ultimately win games with just their offense, in my opinion. But they have a good defense, But yeah, I'm gonna give this game to the Saints, and I'm gonna say Saints by 14, just because I'm worried that for whatever reason, they're gonna have some offensive slump. To be honest with you, looking at the next game, a very interesting game. We have Vikings and Falcons, both 4-4 records. The Vikings, before losing Cousins for the season, people were saying that, oh, this team is playing a lot better. They obviously, the defense has been, starting to be more stout. If you look at the teams they've played, they obviously held San Fran, albeit a banged up San Fran, 2 weeks ago, to 17. Yeah, Chicago, yeah, they only held them to 13, but then it's like, the defense looks like it's been kind of correcting things, even though it's kind of like, oh, is it against the best competition type of thing? The Packers have my Packers, who I predicted would lose last week, because of the offensive struggles, were beat by a good amount more than I thought it was, but mainly because I think the Vikings were essentially gifted like a free touchdown off of a turnover, where it's like they were able to get their lead, but the Falcons, they kind of had to suffer the wrath of I can't remember the rookie's name right now. The rookie Tennessee QB who was picked first overall in the second round. And it was a game that I thought that they were going to be able to win because Tennessee just hasn't looked very good. But this game is gonna fall onto, in my opinion, it's gonna fall onto whether Bijan Robinson can play really well. You have, Dean Lowry out, his starting defensive end for the Vikings, and then obviously Kirk Cousins placed on IR. And, otherwise no other really key guys. Obviously they are still without Jefferson on the Vikings. That would, the Kirk Cousins injury definitely coming at a pretty inopportune time just because they don't have Jefferson, but this team has been playing really well. Madison has been really good. Their wide receiver, their wide receiver, um, their wide receiver room, pretty good with Osborne, and I think it's Addison. I think it's Addison on the Vikings. Let me see here. I they have all these guys. They have, okay, Addison and Madison. You see, I always feel weird saying that, but it's like it is the way that it is the way that the team is built. And Madison has been a very good running back, and then Addison has definitely become kind of the guy that it's like, oh, he's doing a really good job, and they're using him very well as TJ Hawkinson, obviously. But but excuse me for a second. I gotta check out something. Sorry about that. My dog is being a little demon, guys. But yeah, looking at the Vikings, they obviously have Jaron Hall. They traded for Joshua Dobbs because Nick Mullins, to be honest, has been on like IR like the whole season. Where, yeah, ultimately, this team is a lot of young talent essentially right now. The only player on here that I really feel like is pretty established is, Osborne and then Hawkinson, and I don't really know what to expect from Hall. Obviously, I remember when he came in last week and he had, a forced fumble on him, like, right away, type of thing. But then looking at the Falcons, they're pretty banged up as well. I don't really know what to expect from them. You obviously have Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. And then, oh, I guess that I get, Ritter's been benched, obviously. So you have Taylor Heineke. But I think Taylor Heineke isn't afraid to go and ball out and lay it on the line type of thing. But without Drake London, that means that his primary threats are Van Jefferson and Matt Collins. I think Matt Collins has been playing well. And then obviously, Kyle Pitts, who I feel like he's just been inconsistent. But I think this is a team that's going to lean on the run. They're going to, rely on their defense quite a bit as well, obviously, because, pretty healthy. Pretty healthy. Obviously, Grady Jarrett being out, it kind of sucks. But then they got Contavious Street, Calais Campbell, who's always been, very solid. Bud Dupree, AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates, and that sort of thing. So I think that, overall to me, I think that the Falcons do win this game, which they are favored by a little small margin, but there's a lot of unknowns in this game. And obviously, looking at each division, Atlanta's winning the division. You've got New Orleans, who's more likely to come ahead in the division this week. And, Minnesota is obviously like, if they drop beneath 500 here, it's kind of tough. But I think I'm going to give this game to the Falcons. I think that they have the best player in Bijan Robinson of each team. They're the best playmaker, at least. I don't know. Maybe on the defensive side, you could say there's other players that are definitely better. But Bijan Robinson, to me, could be one of those guys that, gets after the Minnesota defense, whether it be receiving or rushing. So I'm going to go with the Falcons, and I'm only going to give them a 1 point advantage, to be honest with you, because this game interesting. It's really one of those kind of who knows what's going to happen. Um, Looking at Rams at the Packers, Stafford makes his return to Lambeau Field. They're giving the Rams the advantage, which I completely agree with, to be honest with you. I think that last week they just kind of had, an angry Dallas team just essentially, run them over. And then you even look at the game against, the Pittsburgh, Stafford just hasn't looked like himself. And then, you look at my Packers, losing 4 straight at this point. The last win coming in September, late September, so it's been over a month. And just overall inconsistent play where they haven't even been able to score, over, 60 points in 4 games, where you're not going to, be able to win, many games. Looking at, the Packers, they are the healthiest that I've ever seen them. They only have 2 guys, Quay with a quad injury, and then I believe Rudy Ford. Let me see here. Rudy Ford, I can't remember what he has. Oh, he has a calf injury. That's right, that he suffered. But we did have Owens playing at the end of the Vikings game, who, was penalized a little bit, probably shaking off the rust there. But overall, I'm not really worried too much about the injuries on the Rams. You have Stafford and Puka, but Puka's been listed, I think, on the injury report like every single game, it seems like. And I guess going and looking at this, let me see. We have, yeah, Rams and Puka. But, overall, I think this kind of comes down to Stafford. Stafford has not been playing very well. He's been throwing a good amount of picks, as you guys can clearly see. And I mean, he does have a good amount of yards, but 7 picks just isn't really that reassuring. Obviously, you have Jordan Love with 1 more and only a few more TDs, but, significantly less yards and, that sort of thing. But I think that, the Rams given the way that the Vikings looked against the Packers secondary, and then I mean, the Packers, obviously, we traded Russell Douglas to the Bills. I think that, we're going to have a lot of younger corners where we obviously have Jair Alexander still. I mean, Eric Stokes is on IR, who looks like he would be the clear number two again at this point if he were to ever come back. Then you have Keyshawn Nixon, Valentine, and Ballantyne. And, let me just go and I guess look at the depth chart here real quick. Um, to see what the defense is looking like. Obviously, you have Quay with his injury. I fully expect him to go. Um, Overall, I just think that the Rams, they're going to look at the tape from the Vikings and they're going to do a lot of dip and dunk, which I fully think that Stafford does a good job of doing, where he doesn't force it downfield too much, and I don't know what to expect from. I just don't know what to expect. Looking at this, they have Carrington Valentine. They have Carrington Valentine starting opposite Jair Alexander, and then they still have Keyshawn Nixon, who is probably definitely the slot still, and then you have Corey Ballantyne as the fourth corner. Rudy Ford questionable, and then you have Jonathan Owens taking over for Darnell Savage ultimately, but if Rudy Ford goes out and you have or doesn't go, you have Dallin Levitt, who not many people even know about, to be honest with you. And I mean, maybe Rashawn Gary has a huge game coming off of his contract signing or something like that, because I can see him getting after Stafford, on a line that has been somewhat questionable for the Rams for the last couple of years. But yeah, ultimately, I don't really, trust my team with the way that they've played and with the soft defense and Puka Nakua and Cooper Cup. It just seems like, they're even an upgrade from what we played last week, you know, uh, from a Vikings team that was without Jefferson and still carved us up. So it's like I'm predicting, a win by 10 for the Rams, to be honest with you, even though it's in Lambeau. But it's like I still remember sometimes Stafford coming into Lambeau and playing really well because he has such mad respect, for the Packers and Lambeau Field, and he's played there a number of times, so he's well seasoned and he knows what it's like as well. But yeah, Rams by 10. Yeah, who knows with this game, to be honest with you, a little bit. But moving on, we have Commanders Patriots. I find it absolutely asinine, to be honest with you, that they are actually saying the Patriots are going to win this game. I will say that I think that Belichick does a good job preparing for young QBs, and he runs schemes that really deceive them. Although I think that Howell is just playing really, really well. You don't have Curtis Samuel this game. He's been banged up this year. Washington, obviously, sellers at the deadline. I guess the one thing I will say is that they are without Young and Sweat. So it's like, who knows how bad this defense could be, I guess. This might be the game, where the New England offense explodes because they don't have any opposition really going up against them. Um, oh, take it out. But yeah, looking at the Commanders, this is going to be a team that is led by their offense. They obviously didn't sell anybody on offense because this is the offense they're going to have going forward. Obviously Sam Howell's their guy. Brian Robinson Jr., their running back, McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, who's been playing well, Curtis Samuel if he's healthy. And I mean, the only position I really see on this offense that like is up for debate possibly would be tight end. They obviously have four on the roster. But yeah, looking at this defense, let's look at their, new starting rushers. They have Casey Toohill and James Smith Williams. I don't know either of these guys. The only guy that was kind of, the stalwarts of those, of that line at this point is Deron Payne and then Jonathan Allen. And Jonathan Allen hasn't been happy. I'm surprised they didn't deal him, to be honest with you, because he has not been happy at all with the Commanders, and the team that they have. So it's like, who knows? This is not looking like a good situation for the Commanders for the rest of the season. They could be going for a really high pick, but then again, they say that Rivera's on the hot seat, so who knows? And I feel like Rivera's always going to be a guy who prepares his team to play. He's just not a guy to just like slump it. He's not a guy to slump it. I'm just gonna say it. So the Commanders are probably gonna show up to play. New England, Devontae Parker being out really sucks. To be honest with them, their number one wide receiver. They obviously still have Juju Smith-Schuster, who just hasn't produced this game, and just a good amount of injuries on offense. But it's like I said, the defense. The defense to me, still really sound. They still, find ways to play and limit points at least. But I am gonna go with Commanders just because I think that they can score more points than the Patriots. And it's just like I feel like even though they traded on the Commanders, I don't think that they're ready to. They just don't seem like a team to kind of give up, especially coached by Rivera. But I'm going to give Commanders by 3 with apparently an upset win over New England in a game that probably doesn't really mean too much. Um, Moving on, we have Colts Panthers. Panthers coming with their first win last week over the Texans. Um, the Colts, to be honest with you, they really, they have an uphill battle like everyone in the division besides Jacksonville. And Carolina clearly, even though they're in one of the worst divisions in football record wise, I don't think that they're really trying to make a run where they go and they win 10 straight and go out with 11 wins or something like that. And I don't think that they're built for it I don't know, unless they play well every single game, but I just don't see it happening. And I mean, the other thing about it is that they've kind of have injuries stacked against them where it's like Von Bell, their good starting safety opposite Jeremy Chin, is hurt. And and looking at their offense, they've leaned heavily on Adam Thielen. Laviska Shenault is out, not playing in this game. And they just don't really, Justin Houston is out. I guess Jeremy Chin is on IR. I didn't even realize that. I guess I didn't notice when that actually happened this year. Excuse me, but I I think I'm gonna have to go with the Colts based on the fact that last week seemed like kind of a fluke for the Panthers, an outlier game. And the thing about the Colts is that they've been going up against some pretty stiff talent. Their last win did come against Tennessee, who was a struggling team at the time. But they've played up against the Rams, who have been, their record doesn't say it, but they've been playing pretty good football this year. Jacksonville, clearly good. Cleveland, a pretty good team, that they barely lost to. And then New Orleans, a team that finally came alive last week. But I think that with Minshew and the way that this team is playing, I think that they can methodically beat the Panthers. And I think that even though they're not loaded with weapons, I think that, Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor and then Pittman Jr., who's been playing really well, can run, run around this Panthers defense, to be honest with you. And I think the Panthers just aren't going to score very much. I mean, their win last week, they didn't score very much, to be honest with you, against it was a good Texans defense, to be honest with you. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Colts, and I'm gonna go Colts by 10 in this game. Moving on, we have Giants, Raiders. The Raiders, obviously, biggest staff moves of the week, firing the GM and the head coach, McDaniels. I'm not gonna lie, I thought Devontae Adams was gonna get dealt. I feel like the owner probably thought, oh, it's either McDaniels and the GM or it's Adams. And you don't get rid of a guy like Adams. He is the kind of guy that it's like you keep around if you plan to have any sort of contention, in future years, being the best wide receiver in the NFL. Clearly, extremely frustrated, more frustrated than I've ever seen Adams before, but looking at the Giants, goodness, the plethora of injuries continues on this team. Tyrod Taylor isn't going to be playing. You got Darren Waller isn't going to be playing. They do have Daniel Jones back, which is good. But so they have DJ Ice, Saquon Barkley, Slayton, Wandale, and Hodgins. But I'm kind of interested to see whether or not their O line holds up against Max Crosby. Because to be honest with you, Daniel Jones is a pretty fast guy, and he can probably escape from Max Crosby a few times. But Daniel Jones, is coming off an injury, so he hasn't played in a few games. How is he going to respond to the pressure, of going up against a guy like Crosby? And to me, it's like, even with all of these injuries, you've got Divine Diablo and then Luke Masterson, out on the Raiders. I don't really care. Max Crosby to me is like 90% of that defense. Maybe I'm giving a little too much credit, but when you think of the Raiders defense, there's only one name you really think about, and that's Max Crosby. You know, uh, you know, he, the flip side with the Raiders, they benched Garoppolo. They said take a hike. They said take a hike to Garoppolo, and they're starting Aiden O'Connell, who, looking at his stats a little bit earlier, because I was kind of interested, I was like, he didn't play terribly. He didn't exactly say, oh, I should, obviously he didn't sing home with that he should be the starter or anything like that, after those, because they obviously still plugged in Jimmy G. But then again, you can have the bias of McDaniels, who's like, oh, yeah, no, Jimmy G is starting. There's no question, because he obviously, he was obsessed with, replicating the New England, offense. And Jimmy G was, a former, QB under Brady with the Patriots, but it's like I ultimately think that, yeah, the Giants, looking at this, they have probably a better shot. But you look at some of the goofy things and how free spirited, the team is. It's almost like the fresh start that they didn't know that they were getting. Like, some teams are in turmoil, and it takes a while for, the owner to enact what he did, until like late in the season, when it's like, do you even have a reason to play afterwards? The Raiders obviously being 3-5 in a tough AFC conference record wise, when you're in a division as well with, the Chargers, who I think are on the cusp of, becoming a winning team and solidifying their spot in the playoffs later in the year. But it is an uphill battle. Um, I do think it's huge that they don't have Waller, to be honest with you, because I think that Jones has been, he's been playing fine this year. Really good completion percentage. Not a ton of yards, obviously, 6 picks. If you look at this, it looks like he's playing like ass, but his line has been terrible. And there are QBs with better O lines that have thrown, more picks this year. I think of Prescott, kind of. I think he has right around like 6 picks or something, and he's got a way better O line, than Daniel Jones has. And it's like the fact that, both of your tackles are still, with injuries, type of thing. Yeah, let me go look at this real quick. You have even your kicker is out, which is just never good. But then you have Evan Neal with an ankle, and then Andrew Thomas. They're not listing his thing here, but I'm sure it has something to do. I think it was like a knee injury or something like that. Is never good when it's limiting your ability to move. And like I said, Max Crosby. So it's like Daniel Jones is probably going to be scrambling a lot again, you know, and, more power to him, to be honest with you. I think that Daniel Jones needs to do that. I think it's one of his most valuable assets. He is a pretty fast guy for being as big as he is. But ultimately, I don't know what's going to happen in this game. I want to say that I think that New York does have a pretty good defense. I think I'm just going to go with them by 3, to be honest with you, because I think that there's just too many intangibles and randoms in this game to know what's going to happen. If they can, get Devontae involved to the old Devontae, I do think the Raiders win this game. Having the best offensive player as well as who you could argue is the best defensive player in this game. There is Sexy Dexy, who is, quite a player and has a name for himself in the league already. But yeah, Max Crosby might even be the best defensive player in this game. But yeah, I'm still going with Giants by 3 because they obviously didn't and I kind of assume that the Raiders aren't going to be able to flip to a whole system in less than a week because they played Monday night, obviously. But yeah, Giants by 3. Chance for an upset, I guess. Now we have, an NFC matchup, Cowboys and Eagles. This is obviously Cowboys and Eagles. Looking at this game, they actually give it to the Eagles barely. This is really close to 50%, and I don't even think the percentages really work because it doesn't reach 100, which is odd. You would think like, 50.1% and then, 49.9 or something like that in my opinion. But I think that Hurts is not going to be as dumb as to, essentially give, free pick sixes and momentum, picks to the Cowboys. I think that the Cowboys, one of the reasons why they stomped so hard last game is they had so many like momentum driving plays just consecutively that they just stomped the Rams. And then you have the Eagles, who obviously their last game was against Washington, a Washington team that has, a pretty good defense and a pretty good offense, to be honest with you, that, matches them really well. And the Cowboys, I guess, interestingly enough, it's like you think about a team that it's like you you think about a team that it's like, this was the only team that Arizona beat. I think that the Cowboys are one of those teams that they just don't do well against good teams. And I guess, looking at Prescott, he does have, I guess, less picks than he does have less picks, I guess, than Daniel Jones is, like I mentioned in a second before. But it's like some of his picks have been in some of these most commanding wins. Like last week, he still threw a pick, was the highest PFF I know quarterback in the league. But I don't know what to say about a team like the Cowboys, who, even though they are 5-2, they just don't seem to me a team that is as dominant as they are. And I think that, you know, with it being, a divisional matchup in the NFC East between the two top teams, I think that even if Philadelphia loses this game, they still, they still probably end up winning the division. I I'm trying to think of a point to make in this game of why, I think. But they do play Dallas again in December. Almost a month, to be honest with you, after, the previous game. And it's obviously a night game and it's at Dallas. I think if the Eagles are gonna, I think if the Eagles are going to, kind of solidify themselves as the top seed, this is the game they have to win, to be honest with you. And I do think that they do that. I think that looking at their team, I think that Hurts does a better job of running the football around. I think that AJ Brown is absolutely killing this year. CD Lamb has had some great games this year, but overall he's been really, really inconsistent. The other thing too that I think about is that Dallas's defense is really good against the pass and not so good against the run. Swift has been having a monster year and could easily be the focal point that they want to, focal on and use him as a weapon to get around this Dallas defense. Because I don't think that they, besides the pass rush, they just don't really defend the run like I really need them to. And it's one of those things that the Cowboys can get exposed over. Um, Thinking about that, I do like Tony Pollard. However, I think that the Eagles have just an overall commanding defense where they are just ultimately they're too stacked, to be honest with you. They don't really, they have been giving up a good amount of points, but I think that the team itself, is really healthy, with two, really good corners with Darius Slay and James Bradbury, and then you also have Hassan Reddick, N'Kobe Dean, and Zach Cunningham. So your linebacker core is really, really good at stopping the run as well as pass rushing. And I just think that you aren't going to be able to go up the middle. It's going to be very predictable that you're going to need to go outside because obviously Fletcher Cox and Jordan Davis, probably the best defensive tackle tandem in the NFL, to be honest with you, aren't they're just not going to they're just not going to, falter. And then you also have, Jalen Carter, who has been playing really, really well, who they plug in from time to time, you know, and obviously Josh Sweat, the other Sweat. And it's like, I think about this offense and I think of how good AJ Brown is doing, Devonta Smith, obviously. And then you have DeAndre Swift. And it's just kind of like, it's such a stacked O line that the Cowboys, I just don't think are going to be able to make up for it. Looking at their defense, you got Demarcus Lawrence and you got Micah Parsons, obviously. But then you have, who are these other guys? You obviously have Leighton Vander Esch on IR, who was kind of up and coming and doing well, earlier this season. But then who are these other guys? You got Marquise Bell, you got Damone Clark, Dorrance Armstrong, Osa Idiguizua, and Jonathan Hankins. I just don't think that you have the defense that is going to be required to beat a team like the Eagles, to be honest with you. And then it's like you even look at last week, obviously the Eagles went up against the Commanders of arguably a good defensive line. I wouldn't say better than the players on Dallas, but they do better against the run, and they were still able to put up a commanding amount of points, you know. But this is a division game, and the Cowboys do have a lot of tape to go off of last week, but I still think that they don't really defend against AJ Brown and Hurts and Swift. So I'm gonna go with the Eagles, and I'm gonna go with the Eagles by 3 over the Cowboys in Philadelphia. Moving on, we have another great game. We have Bills versus the Bengals in Cincinnati. Um, I do think the Bills lose this game. I think the thing with the Bills is that they've been very inconsistent this year. I think that, you know, you do have, Kyrie Elam is out unfortunately, and then, or I mean, is on IR, and then AJ Klein and Balin Spector, but overall a very, very healthy team. And then you have some, Joe Mixon being the most troubling here, to be honest with you, who's questionable. And, but otherwise you have a game where it's like, who is really going to put a stop, in my opinion, to Stephon Diggs on the Cincinnati defense? They are obviously without Jesse Bates from last year. They obviously, they obviously have kind of a defense that's they're pretty good in my opinion. A lot of good guys. You know, Cam Taylor Britt and Shidobi Awuzie are pretty good corners. But not the best. I wonder if they're going to be able to really get after Josh Allen. To be honest with you, with this line that they have. Obviously, they have Logan Wilson, who is an incredible linebacker. And is going to be able to probably limit the running game, and maybe they spy him on Allen or whatever else, but you also have, James Cook, who's having a great year with, just over 100 carries and 486 yards. And I mean, even with Mixon mained up, he really isn't the focal point, and I think that if he plays, I mean, he's going to be a go to be near 100%. But I think that I think that it's going to be I think it's just going to be hard, for Cincinnati to compete with the Bills if it's the Bills that are on a good day. Obviously, recently losing to the New England, soundly winning against Tampa Bay, limiting their points. And, then of course, competing with a tough Jacksonville team, a month ago, nearly a month ago. And the Bengals, obviously, they kind of are coming into their own. I don't like betting against Joe Burrow, to be honest with you, which is just probably another reason why, they came off a good win against San Fran, really limiting San Fran, having also beaten Seattle, who's been very sound. And, even the Rams, when they were seemingly struggling, and the Rams were doing really well early in the season. But I think that the Bengals are finally coming into their own, but I still don't think that they're really going to be able to beat the Bills. And I'm not going to get bet against a Bills team on their good day, because they are as good as any team in the NFL. I will also say that they obviously, they shored up their cornerback situation, where they went out and they got Rasul Douglas. Obviously Taron Johnson is the other guy on the other side of the ball, but I think that Rasul Douglas does really, really, really help. He does really, really help this secondary, because they play a very gritty and stingy type of defense, which is what I think Rasul Douglas was kind of meant for. Taller guy, bigger corner, very lengthy. And him and Taron Johnson are going to be playing very scrappy football with this team. I'm sad that he's gone, but I think that, they really kind of shored up. And then you also have Von Miller, Leonard Floyd, Ed Oliver, Greg Rousseau, and this team just ultimately has probably a better defense as well over the Bengals. The Bengals, the problem that I have with them is that they really haven't solidified their defense, albeit they're a very scrappy defense and they're very well coached. But they just don't have that star talent, I feel like, to push them over the top in order to get after QBs and, make them either rush throws or not be able to throw, or have to escape out of the pocket. So I'm going with the Bills, and I'm gonna go with them by 7 points, to be honest with you, because I think that, they really do need to kind of prove that they can win this game. And I think that they are itching to get back into first in their division, with, the Jets scraping behind them, and then Miami only really ahead of a game. So and I mean, Looking at this team, their points, have been really good, even though they've been banged up, obviously. But yeah, I'm going to go, with Buffalo. And like I said, I'm going to go with them by 7 because I think that they just have too many guys on their team that are going for them. So yeah, Buffalo by 7 over the Bengals. We have we have Chargers Jets on Monday night. I don't really know if I really you know what, we will go over this game. This Monday night game to me is kind of, can the Jets keep on winning the way they have against a QB who I wholeheartedly believe is elite in the league? And I think that they've kind of benefited from the fact that Brees Hall has, continued to produce for them, and I mean, looking at this game, I'm sure New York is thinking, and depending on what happens tomorrow with Buffalo and the Bengals, which I just mentioned, I think the Jets can be in a favorable spot to potentially, go in front of Buffalo. I think that the Chargers have been playing a lot better, but the Jets do have one of the best defenses in the NFL. We looking at this, they really haven't given up that many points. Over the course of the year, 129 being best in their division. In a division that has the likes of, Buffalo, stout division that I was just talking about. New England obviously just hasn't had the offense and it's probably affected their defensive numbers, but they have a really good defense. And they're going up against a Chargers team that has given up quite a bit of points. Not the most by any means, but quite a bit of points because of their inconsistencies. I think that this game can be a lot closer than it says here, to be honest with you, because I like the Jets defense. It has been, really good for the last few years. It's why the only player that they really, needed or position they needed a, really competent player to put them over the edge was QB. But, you know, looking at the Chargers, I think that Keenan Allen is also out. I don't think there's any other wide receiver that is near his caliber. Let me go look at the injury report here really quick. I guess they're not listing anything here, but I do believe, let me go look at the Chargers here. Oh, I guess Keenan Allen isn't out. Maybe I saw something from another time. So he's not out, but you do have Joshua Palmer, who is questionable. You're still without Mike Williams. Obviously, Eckler is a guy, but I think that the Jets just do a really good. I think that they do a really good job of, dealing with running backs. They have, quite a, they have Quentin Jefferson, they have Quinnen Williams. They obviously have CJ Mosley, Quincy Williams, who's been playing balls out. I don't think it's going to be an easy time for Eckler. And then, looking at the corners, you obviously have Sauce and DJ Reed, and I mean, the Chargers aren't really a team that I feel like is known for really throwing it deep all field. They really, with Herbert, they play a very surgical kind of game where they are going underneath, they are going over the middle short, and they'll occasionally take it deep. But I think that, with the kind of game that it's going to be, beating that, I think it's going to be tough for them. I think that Sauce Gardner, has the size and the speed to really, make Keenan Allen make it not an easy game for him, you know? And I think that it can be a lot closer of a game, regardless of what this says. Obviously you kind of have both teams are playing for, essentially a playoff spot at this point where it's like the Jets want to stay above 500. The win here would be huge. The Chargers obviously get to 500 with a win on this game. It is at the Jets. It's a primetime game. Who knows if the pressure gets to Zach Wilson? I don't think it really gets to Herbert, to be honest with you. But I think both teams are pretty healthy. Obviously, a couple of guys here, but other guys that I think aren't as huge, type of thing. But overall, I think the Jets, they've been obviously limiting teams to a low number of, points these last few weeks. And I mean, even when they lost to Kansas City, this was a game they definitely could have won. And their last kind of flub of a game was against New England. But yeah, I think that this is going to be a lot closer of a game. I am going to go with the Chargers, but it's not going to be some crazy margin. I'm going to give them a 3-point advantage, and that is my prediction for Monday Night Football. Um, Overall, though, I think that that's going to do it for this, edition of Castcast. If you guys have anything to say or any questions or anything you want to ask me about within the league, you can go ahead and do so. Otherwise, I am going to call it for this edition of Castcast, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday. Thank you very much.